Good afternoon. You're welcome to take off your jacket because it's a bit warm. We try our best. And welcome to this session. We'll wait just for a few last camera. Wherever, yes, you can sit here. So this session is about technology transfer. And one thing I would like to tell you that we really try to couple smart specialization and technology transfer. There's a simple and easy reason for that. If you push too much to develop technology that don't have a fallout in your region, in your country, then you eventually invest a lot in people, in knowledge, and this investment goes out. So I remember I was in Thessaloniki a couple of years ago, and there were a presentation of many very good startuppers presenting innovations in mechatronics, in aeronautics, in space technologies. There was no industry, so they were all going to Germany, and the net result was a big investment of the Greek government to form these scientists, and then they with that knowledge they go away. So it is very important also to link the technology transfer and the instrument, which are not necessarily the same for each sector. I mean, the instrument for ICT are not the same of the instrument for medicine because the time lag is different. So there is a need also to try to couple smart specialization to the to technology transfer, and that's also one of the things that we would like to discuss today. Now we have 4 presentations, and the first is my colleague Alessandro Faccio, who is the head of the Technology Transfer, newly established Technology Transfer Competence Center in Brussels. Then Adrian Kurai will talk at the end because he has some nice story to tell us. Then we have Hardy Schmidt, where is Hardy? He's here. Hardy is a good friend and a very knowledgeable expert. He has been setting up the Adlerhof Science Park, which is the biggest science park in Germany, I think 400 hectares, something like this. So I think he can share some of experience in the. And then we have Henrik Redin, who is here, who is the president of the ISTP Association. The ISTP Association is the European-wide Association of Technology Transfer practitioners who they just held a conference in Dublin, extremely interesting, with a lot of very, very good presentations. And they are really trying, we have a collaboration agreement with them to try really to implement at the national level, using also in particular the national network. I mean, in particular for the colleagues from the Western Balkan, it is important to know that that it's important to form also national networks of technology transfer practitioner, and they can find a home in the STP organization, which is based in Leiden in Holland. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Alessandro for his first presentation.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is both a pleasure and a privilege to be here today. If Stoyan can manage to get my slides up, I'll click them through myself. I will be talking today about our newly established Competence Center on Technology Transfer. And I would actually like to start by looking a little bit at the background. I would like to, but I'm not sure. It was working.
Just press very slowly because it's very sensitive for music.
So looking a little bit at the background, and I'd like to start with a question. Which one of you knows which country is due to become the most competitive knowledge economy in the world by the year 2025. I can tell you that the capital starts with B and the president's name starts with X. We are looking at China, as a matter of fact. 2025, the strategy aims to make China a key world leader in 10 key technologies. Why am I talking about China now? Just because if you look at the world, there's a number of things that are going on, and you can see where the European Union, all of it, stands with respect to China and the United States in terms of R&D intensity, where China is catching up very quickly, world share of high-impact publications, patent applications, especially if we look at EU13, and when you look at the numbers in China, doubled in the last 3 years. The Chinese share in European firms going through the roof over the last 6 years or so. And that's not the end of it. This is just about where we fare compared with China. This is another graph that I think is quite interesting. This is the changing importance of intangible assets in the S&P 500 stock market index. And you can see in 1975, 17% of a company's value was in intangibles. Today, it is 84%. Intangibles, which includes intellectual property, of course, but also knowledge and know-how. So the world is changing very, 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 very quickly. And here again, these were the top companies by market capitalization back in 2006, names we all recognize. Well, General Electric very much on the way out, but ExxonMobil was there, GE was there, Gazprom, Microsoft. Fast forward to 2018, Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Tencent. So again, the companies that are running the show, traditional manufacturing industry, the world has changed very, 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 very radically. The advent of artificial intelligence, this is another development that we've got on the horizon. And here you can see the percentage of startups that are being created, and you can see how investments in artificial intelligence are going up. And what is very interesting is if you look at the composition in 2017, it's the graph at the bottom on the left, you can see that the US and China are doing very well, but the EU, well, shall we say nowhere to be seen? Or something close to that. And on top of that, Moore's law, the incremental augmentation of semiconductor processing power, is being completely overtaken by the importance and the exponential growth of data. And deep tech startups, companies that require more and more and more investment to get to wherever they want to go. $150 million to set up a deep tech startup. Why am I saying all of this? And what does it mean for the countries of Southeastern Europe? I guess when I see this, I don't see a blue ocean. I see what is definitely a red ocean. And it's a very dynamic situation, and it's a very competitive environment strategically, economically, and technologically. And the countries of Southeastern Europe are at a juncture. What skills and what assets are you going to leverage to remain relevant in this hyper-competitive and hyper-dynamic environment? And one of those is probably trying to harness innovation and technology. And technology transfer, which is what we're talking about today. There's a very good quote by Jeffrey Nicholson. It's what research transforms money into knowledge. Technology transfer transforms knowledge into money. It's a bit of an alchemy, but it's essentially the process that you use to take research results out of the laboratory of universities, of research centers, and onto the market. Why is this particularly relevant in Southeastern Europe? Because historically, there are very good universities, very good academic, very good fundamental science, but the linking pin, the connection with industry and the capability of commercializing that research and turning it into products and services and innovation has come a little bit amiss, probably as a result of historical transitions in the years gone by. But it's very, 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 very important that we restore that connection and that we make it as efficient and as effective as we possibly can, helping to transition technologies across the so-called valley of death, where the funding for research dries up, but because they are actually viable as businesses and products and services that the public wants to use. Now, the interesting thing when it comes to the establishment of our Technology Transfer Competence Center is that we believe there's at least 3 things that are necessary to do technology transfer. The first one, and in this slide I originally had pounds, the British currency, but then I was told that given the current Brexit predicaments, that's not very politically correct. Take it out, change it to something else. But you've got people, policies, procedures, the structure of an innovation ecosystem. How much do people know? Can they do it? It's also an expensive process, so you actually need money to be able to commercialize technologies. You need money for prototyping, you need money for proof of concept, you need money for market validation, and so on and so forth. And like a good old production function, there's the combination of people and money, total factor productivity. Where does all of this happen? Innovation is tied to places, environments, ecosystems. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. What do those places and those ecosystems actually look like? So these are the 3 pillars that we've focused the activities of the Competence Center on. And it's very important, as has been said time and time again, smart specialization strategies. There's a beautiful Japanese proverb that says, vision without action is a daydream, but action without vision is a nightmare. So you need to have a strategy in place before you do anything, but then that strategy needs to be turned into action. And that's where technology transfer becomes very important as a way, not just of implementing smart specialization strategies, but as a way of making sure that the absorption capacities are actually there on the ground, that the capacity building and training and procedures and processes and rules and regulations are actually there to be able to make things work successfully. So at the end of last year, we set up a competence center for technology transfer based at the Joint Research Center in Brussels. And the idea is that this will become a reference point, both for the Commission, but also for EU member states and for other institutions of the Union, and that it will support policy development and provide access to knowledge and best practices and information on technology transfer. It looks more or less like this. Those 3 boxes in the circle are, give or take, the 3 areas that I mentioned before, but I'd like to say a few words about each one of those. If we look at the first one, capacity building, it's about, if you go from the macro to the micro level, you start at the level of the structure of a country, you look at the research and innovation system structure, you look at the intellectual property legal framework, you look at the incentive schemes that are in place, whether they are fiscal or of other types, you look at the intellectual property ownership framework, do you have professor privilege, do you not have professor privilege? And then it trickles down at the level of individual institutions. So inside single universities and research centers, do they have proper procedures, proper licensing policies, non-disclosure and non-competition agreements, spin-off policies, material transfer agreement policies, disclosure policies? Do they have support for proof of concept? Do they know how to manage relationships with industry for contract research and things like that? And last but not least, you've looked at the overall framework, you've looked at the way it's organized within single universities and research centers. Last but not least, you've got people, the individuals that are actually working there. Can they do technology scouting? Do they understand how you identify a piece of science or a piece of research that can be turned into intellectual property? Do they know how to protect it? Can they patent? Can they do freedom to operate analysis? Can they manage the resulting intellectual property? Can they license it? Can they deal with the private sector? Can they find customers? Can they analyze global value chains? Can they deal with investors? Can they become entrepreneurs? Maybe some of them can, maybe some can't. Certainly something that can be taught. But these are all issues that we have looked at for very many years and provided a lot of support and capacity building in the countries of Southeastern Europe since at least 2014. Secondly, money. Technology transfer is expensive. It's a process that requires funds and support, but in what form should this financial support and these funds be delivered? Does it make sense that support for technology transfer should come in the form of grants? If it doesn't, if it shouldn't be grants because researchers tend to use free money to deliver more publications, then should it be loans? Well, are companies that are at the TT stage very likely to pay back loans? Maybe yes, maybe no. How else can you share the risk? Maybe equity instruments, maybe guarantees, maybe blended finance instruments. There's a lot of financial engineering that goes into trying to think what the best ways of plugging the valley of death might actually be, and we do a lot of work around that as well. And last but not least, ecosystems and the structure of the environment. Innovation districts are popping up and clusters popping up all over Europe. We try to understand essentially, is there an off-the-shelf recipe that you can take from one place and replicate somewhere else? What is the role of the public? What is the role of the private sector? How do you get them to play together nicely and to develop, to foster the sort of growth of these virtuous circles? We are doing some studies. We do studies on a regular basis on everything from corporate venturing to state aid to analysis of technology transfer in the neighborhood countries, public-private partnerships. But I think what is most interesting for the people here today is that the Competence Center is supported by a community of practitioners and a community of experts. And this includes certainly the TTO Circle, which is an association of the technology transfer offices of the 32 largest research organizations in Europe, where we try and essentially extract best practices and put them at the disposal of our customers and of our community. We do a lot of projects across Southeastern Europe, from Bulgaria to Montenegro, and we are increasingly trying to extract that knowledge and systematize it and actually make it accessible to people that are interested in gaining access to it. We actually have a new portal that is live, and the idea is that you can all, if you have a need for support in any of those domains, you will be able to access high quality training and background material that is available to you, and of course you will be able to reach out and contact us directly if that is appropriate. And I think that is where
Thank you very much, Alessandro. So we will make all these slides available, so whoever is interested can access and have an interaction with us through this community of practice, which will be also given in the slides that will be put possibly tomorrow on the internet, or even as soon as possible. Any question to Alessandro? Yes.
I'm sorry, I sat down too soon.
It's okay, sorry. Yeah, a question. So basically, the Chinese and Americans are doing something in some parts much, much better than the EU. Can EU model what the Americans or the Chinese are doing? I think they're doing things differently from each other, but it works much better than the EU. Can one copy at least part of that model to EU?
I think every time you copy something, you need to readapt it to your own needs. To simply transpose something from A to B doesn't really work. But if you look at what is happening in many parts of Europe, I mean, in the US, this all started in 1980, when it was decided that ownership of intellectual property would stay with the universities, technology transfer offices, rather than the federal government. That system has been replicated across a number of countries, and there's many places in the EU that have been extremely successful at creating environments that are conducive to this sort of places. So we have homegrown, home-developed success stories, even in Southeastern Europe. Ljubljana is a very good one.
I think we'll take this as a very important recommendation to also look more in detail what China is doing and what is. Yes.
Well, you have done a lot of research on technology transfer. Did you actually try to correlate it with national cultures?
Correlate
this
technology
is
well,
inspired by my first question.
we've not tried to do that scientifically by collecting data, but I can tell you there's plenty of anecdotal evidence.
Not anecdotal.
If you go to Silicon Valley, everyone will tell you the fundamental difference between Europe and the US is European attitude to failure.
No, there is scientific approach.
We have not done it. We
Okay,
have not done it
cultural
yet.
dimensions which have been-
Okay, that's a recommendation I will take up. The cultural dimension in China. Yes.
I would like to ask a question that all the time asking, and since haven't received consistent answer. When we can filtering the ideas, how the system work in order to filtering the transfer of technology and inventing of things like wheel, hot water, America, etc. If you understand what I want to say, because I reading many documents from the European Commission, like Horizon 2020 journal, etc., and see that many times they make the hot water but 1 degree hotter, make wheel but little bit more squared, and discover America but 1 meter east. So how we can get measures in order, because this amongst other also make rising the anti-system parties that say, look what your money is spent for. So I want to see the filter, which filter you can apply.
Which filter do you apply?
I don't know. My first reaction is that most innovation is actually incremental. It's not necessarily disruptive breakthrough innovation. I mean, you've got disruptive breakthrough innovation, but that's a very small. I mean, probably one of the most innovative companies that exists in Europe today is Ryanair. What new technology did they invent?
Small seeds.
Anyway, I have to close now the debate.
But it's
We
an
will
interesting
continue
question.
because,
Maybe we
I
can
need to give
continue
the floor
on that
to Hardy.
later.
Thank you very much. So Hardy, now you have the floor. Tell us something about.
Matteo, that was very inspiring. I come from the location end. So you remember the 3 pillars to the right, places was the headline. I've developed a tech park, several. Then we, of course, thought about tech transfer, but in the end, we wanted success. So those 3 things were really important. You should know that I'd been an entrepreneur, and I'm a startup and a business angel. So in this transfer, many things I would like to mention in my presentation beyond the place. That's the right one. So I'm here because I'm a member of the advisory board of International Association of Science Parks, and that's a big organization which has been in the world for quite many years, about a quarter of a century. We are 353 members in 77 countries, a non-profit organization, and for me, as a tech park manager, that was the annual course I took. Talking to my peers, and I can promise you the experience you make when you develop a location where you want to have all those things happen, which you call transfer, which in the end means jobs. How do you do that? And the learning is, it's quite different in any location. The Chinese, of course, have systematized it. They have about 480 science parks, and those science parks are quite clearly defined by local ones, regional ones, provincial ones, national ones, global ones. And that is a strict hierarchy of things you have to do right. And when you have developed, for instance, one global one, which the gentleman who developed the new area in Shanghai, he's now member of the Standing Committee of the Communist Party. So developing those parks makes careers, at least in China. Does it in Europe and Germany? Not yet, I think. So those are the issues I would like to cover, and hope the time will be okay. So there's one thing: create and identify critical mass. So when you want to create a special place, you don't do that out of nothing. You do that by putting together what the economist would call assets. Means when there is the good luck of having an Eli, and there is a university with the physics disciplines surrounding the environment, and maybe there will be a big hospital which may apply some of the technology, then you have pushed assets together. And I will talk about that. Then support networks. So having pushed the brick and mortar together, they don't speak. So you have to put together networks, and pulling together networks is an art in itself. You shape neighborhoods, kind of the physical neighborhoods, and that can happen in detail and in the micro level. You'd better look at the incubation and the acceleration, but even what is more important, in the retention, because if you want to build a place, it is largely the integral of the jobs created. You want to keep them. Mind the city, so this is not an Akademgorodok. So we're not in the far away in the boondocks. You create something for the nerds. Increasingly, all over the world, it is a city that counts. People want to live in the city, the talents go to the city. Autonomous governance and time is very critical. Normally tech parks are the kind of the hobby of the current minister or the current senator, whatever kind of government you have, and the political opinion swings, and off the know-how is, and a new politician is being assigned. That is doom. That doesn't work, and you need time. I will prove that, but when you then in the end do all this and you measure it, you can smile. So this is maybe hardly readable from the back. Creating critical mass. This is Berlin, and I'm from Berlin. Berlin has 3.4 million inhabitants now, and for quite a long time we were carrying the red lantern in basically every metrics economists measure regional performance. So that was really bad. We highest jobless rate, lowest innovativeness rate, and so on. We had long hours where our pubs were open, but that was it. Now things look a bit different. And what you see here is there are a few locations I've highlighted here, and each and every location went through the process of putting the assets together. So, for instance, this is Adlershof, which I had the pleasure to develop. There was an Academy of Science with 10 institutes. Then they made the decision to put the Math and Science campus of Humboldt University there, and we created a lot of, after a smart specialization prioritization process, we built buildings specialized for young companies who could then, at very favorable rates, go in there and do that. And we, in a way, were the architects of doing that in Charlottenburg, which is a nice place within the city, which actually had the highest density of those assets, but nobody knows. So you may happen in Budapest or wherever you're working, you may find regions of the city where you say, well, actually, there are all the assets there. Why don't we do a systematic process? Once the new airport will be opened, Tegel will become the Urban Tech Republic, which is a new concept of a new tech park. Here is a biology campus with several hospitals and brilliant research, and so on and so on. So creating the critical mass in locations and then somehow giving them a one-piece feeling is the message of this one. And around science, why that? We didn't have anything else. Clustering. Hope that is readable. Just one example. In Adlershof, we had a lot of optics, lasers, and we have a synchrotron. So that in all created something like a scientific cluster for optics and lasers. And it happened to be that quite a lot of the earliest companies that kind of settled or were founded there were around measurements instruments, optical instrumentation, and so on. So after a few years, we recognized actually that is a regional strength, smart city, a smart specialization approach. And so we got the Agency for Business Development in Brandenburg, which is the surrounding state, Optec BB, and Berlin Partner, which is the Innovation and Inward Investment Agency of Berlin, together with the Association of Optics Companies and Researchers together to shape a cooperation agreement. Here's the organization, and this is just one of 5 of these organizations Berlin has finally shaped. And they all try to have their networks, have their places, and have their key scientifics in motors. So clusters or networks, the best is we have professional networks which then shape into clusters, and where there is a lot of production and research behind it. Clusters, having clusters in a park is a key driving thing. If you then go into the micro level, though this is a part of my precious Adlershof, and so what we tried to do when we had empty space, and we could even make it possible, we tried to link together the university, the newly erected technology centers for the companies, so that people have to actually meet in the cantina. So bring that close together if that is possible. In a new study from Bruce Katz and friends from the institute, the Brookings Institute, they have even determined that it is about a quarter of an hour's walking that ends a physical local cluster. So there's research about it, so if you need that and you're beyond the evidence, you can read it there. So that we try to get going, so have people meet, make it easy, just walk. If there's a student wanting to work for 3 hours in a company, make it easy. Then the most important thing. This is original slide I took from Adlershof. So actually, what we thought through the best way of doing tech transfer is to start companies with it. Because what you do immediately, if that company is successful, you generate investive monies for a tech transfer project, which may then, in the end, pay something back to the institute or the university. But if it doesn't, it pays back to the society, and that at least is good. So what we try to bring about in this very special place I'm referring to is we had Humboldt, that is the university, we had a Humboldt spin-off zone. That is where all the activities of entrepreneurial-minded students took place. Then we had a classical incubator, which means small flexible rooms with people who knew how entrepreneurs tick. And then we created, because this is general purpose, so no special rooms for labs, no special rooms for anything really where really substantial money flows in. And that has happened here in the 15 technology centers we had been creating. And in the end, when the companies here, where it was about creating an environment where people could do top-notch research without paying for all the endless real estate money you have to pay, because you're bankrupt before you've even done a single experiment when you have to fulfill all those crazy environmental and other rules. So we, with a lot of European money, we were able to design and conceive those buildings which kind of try to be actually a research lab without the instrumentation. On the other hand, flexible enough to cater for growing office demand and growing lab demand. This was quite difficult, but somehow we got the match nicely. So, and then the finance round, the founders have had success. They sell a lot of product, they get a natural investment round, a new investment round, and suddenly everything we have to offer is too small. And those are specialized companies which have a hard time to find real estate investment companies who would build for them because they are relatively young. So I think it was very helpful that we have access land which we could then reserve, which is important because as soon as something is possible, real estate swamps in and everything is skyrocketing expensive, so we have to keep some space around. Don't waste the real estate asset you personally can manage. So those are the numbers. So there were about 15, now it's about 20 startups every year. Then they gathered in the incubator, in the technology center. There are about 350 companies in the end. Companies who really became relatively big. We are not talking about Amazons. We are talking about decent companies, 50 to 100 to 200 employee people, but a very stable business, owner-held business, who now basically make the beauty of Adlershof. And of course we didn't do that ourselves, and this is what comes to your methods of transfer and support of companies. That is a whole lot of programs which would explode my time here right now. But there are something like business plan competition, and there's a business angel club I had the privilege to be able to found. And there's coaching support bonus for companies who would apply. And they maybe have a coaching bonus for 4,000, 5,000 euros in order to really kind of get a different look from an impartial person who is a specialist. Incubation centers, accelerator programs, they're currently Berlin has a lot of accelerator programs now, about 60, I think. Pitching events everywhere, and the networks. The networks, again, because the networks collect, and that is the effect of smart specialization, the networks collect the knowledgeable partners you actually should talk to if you have, for instance, invented a new calibrating instrument for a laser or something like that. And then if you grow further, you have more powerful financing instruments like Profit, or we have these pre-equipped buildings and financing programs. And in the end, it's growth finance, and then there it becomes an international business where all the professionals, corporate VCs, and the others come to play. I talked about the places that government created. You remember those 6 bubbles around Berlin. And then in 2016, we made a little exercise about where actually are all those accelerators. There was a Springer and a Springer accelerator. All the big, large companies created accelerators in Berlin. How come? Yeah, there were quite a lot of young people there, and companies increasingly relied on young companies to do the innovation and the risky stuff, and then they buy it, maybe for very high monies. It's still, they consider it much more, or much better for them to do it that way. So quite a lot of the people can do everything that started like this was actually in the middle of the city. So the classical tech park approach is big money, 20 years, outside of the street, do the big things. But we completely, for quite a long time, underestimated, or it had to grow, the power of the city. Because when you're then a programmer or a real hard-working guy and you stumble half-blind out of your office when you've worked until 11 at night, they don't want to stumble into woods. They would like to stumble into a pub. And they wouldn't like to have short ways because they work like mad. So this is an effect I would like to highlight with this little picture. And maybe there are more places you even maybe have to discover in your cities and the capitals, which of course are the motors of these processes. It's worth a look. Management, how to manage these kind of places, and how should governance be? This is just an example, barely readable. This is from Hong Kong Science Park. They are a member of International Association as well, and we did a study on how to measure success, and that's why we kind of had that picture available. So that is all the tasks you have to perform to create what you might call an ecosphere, or an ecosystem. And because this is a special science and it takes time, it is important to give the authority who runs a tech park some kind of impregnation against political power and swings. And if it is at all possible, give them some money they can invest and maybe even raise debt. And have an animal like an entrepreneur, if that is possible, to manage it. And because if you only have 4 years, 2 minutes. Yeah, I'm done. If you only have 4 years to perform such a thing, not a single building is done. So you never have enough time to at least create the big ones. In the city, that can be shorter lived. Time, this is the development of Adlershof. So it started off with 3 proud institutions in ended there with the Academy of Science and Central TV of GDR and the GDR Army Base. Mr. Mielke had his guard battalion there. And then the decision, out of this pretty hostile environment, the decision was to create a science technology park. And that was a building place. And there wasn't a single cafe or nothing there was. And then it became the campus. And now, then, only later we started off branding, think about things. So from here to maturity, it has to take time, and you have to be very realistic, I feel, if you want to start campus like that. But if you've done it, and you measure it from the beginning, because then you will see how things grow. Numbers go up. I don't go too much into detail, and if we want to, I want to brag again about Adlershof. We are now more than 1,100 companies there, and it's kind of 20,000 employees, 10,000 students. So it's a buzzing campus, about ready, one would say. And politicians want numbers. This is what we show every year. So that is advertising for such a complicated business where you make mistakes, of course, and they are easily published because you're working on a glass plate. You have to do a good piece of marketing. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Does it work? No. Hello? Maybe this one?
Does it work? Yes. Thanks a lot. Who wants to put on the grill? Hardy, yes, please.
Yes, my name is Mihaela Frâncu from a research institute in Bucharest. And I would like to ask, you said you used a lot of EU money to build the first science park. Who put the rest of the money?
In the first 15 years, about 80 to 90% was all public money because nobody believed in the process. And then, massively, real estate investment came in because, of course, the companies we had been growing in the tech centers, they were mature. Now there were customers. Plus, the branding of the campus had developed and they wanted to be there. So the rest then came later. We're currently doing study on PPP because can we somehow, given public money is scarce and individual money is affluent, how can we use private money into that equation? Currently, I believe that you need years to develop the brand, and then classical real estate will come in. Maybe there are forms to be found where you can really kind of have the real estate as a more patient fund, and less, because real estate money is not patient. Yeah, they want to sell it on and make profits on what they have created. Maybe we find partners for that, because it's actually ideal. There is no investment form which has lower risk than investing in good working science and tech parks. But the money comes later.
Behind this success, there is a man. That's clear. Without a vision and a man, you don't go very far, a champion. It's not very easy to get Hardy. So do you want to put any other question before he flies away? Yes.
just in some numbers, how long is the life of this kind of technological park?
How long the life?
Yes. Increasing maturity and finally, when is a mature business?
Actually, I would like to rephrase that question. When does this tech park become a normal piece of the city? So when do you just leave all the extra efforts away? And I think we are approaching that. The team currently, I'm no longer there, I'm retired, but the team currently focuses on special programs now, like accelerators and things, but it is no longer a massive public building up type of exercise. So we took 20 years. Now you can't destroy it any longer, so it's really solid. But
just like a comparison, is to be enough time to increase the children from youngers to be a mature ones like
yeah, the French call it pépinière, which means yeah.
Okay, I have to maybe the last one, then we have to move to the next.
Indicators do you use to measure success?
Yeah, quite clearly. We had, all the time, we had indicators, which is, of course, very normal. The employment and turnover figures, as long as we could collect them, because we weren't entitled to get all the figures. But we had an external agency to get at least those general input figures. Then we have companies founded, money invested, because, and new companies coming to the site with complicated index, because there are companies actually, if you don't want them, they are non-focused, they don't count. So only companies which actively add a value to the existing network were included. But this was public, so that you were on an X-ray every year.
Thanks a lot. Please give an applause to Hardy. And now I would like to, without further ado, to give the floor to Henrik from the ASTP.
Well, that's okay. Thank you so much. So thank you very much for the kind invitation, Giancarlo, and as you mentioned, we have an ongoing collaboration, and we feel very excited about it. So let me say a few words about new emerging tech trends in tech transfer, and let me see if we can get this to work. Thanks. Technology. Actually, on the first slide, it said Vice President of ASTP. I kind of like that, Giancarlo. That was by intention, I guess. So ASTP in short, we're 900 members from 647 institutions in 48 countries, and we build on individual memberships. So it's professionals for professionals. Established 20 years ago, and we do the benefits for the members, of course, for the professionals at large, i.e. the future members, and also the wider ecosystem. So I just want to walk you through a few things that we see happening in tech transfer, and to save some time, I will just jump ahead. We see a trend that universities, at least, but also research centers, but more and more companies also go from tech transfer to utilization, which is a wider concept. And essentially this is a map from KCA, our sister organization in Australia, that has mapped what are the things that you need to know if you work in a tech transfer office in the old terminology. I think it's a very good map, and of course there are some white spaces as well, because it doesn't cover it all. We heard Alessandro talk about the complexity, of course, so it's nothing new here. But this is definitely something that is ongoing in a wider and wider way. And we need to use this to the best advantage of the community. In the early days, tech transfer was licensing. It was a licensing model. we kind of moved away from the licensing model in the sense that we now talk about a balanced portfolio. So it's spin-offs and startups, it's still licensing, and then it's collaboration, contract research, commission research, consultancy, etc., etc. That makes up the commercial part. Then we have the big non-commercial activities. So when the president of the Oslo University remarked about the 5 most important things Oslo University had contributed with in their 150 years, 2 of them were laws. Environmental legislation and legislation about, I don't remember which one, in Norway, where the university had actually developed the laws. How do we measure that impact in society? It was legislation on equality. That's also tech transfer, or at least utilization, which is extremely important. So this is definitely one of the trends is, and we're still working on that this should be accepted. And how do we actually address this? Because it means that we need new competences suddenly. The old picture doesn't suffice necessarily when we talk about those activities. It's also about balancing the portfolio from a company perspective, the way I see it. Because if you look at this, and there are some stories, I guess, about this, not hard evidence, research evidence, but essentially some people say that this should be 5%. Because this takes long time, costs a lot, and is huge risk. This should be, licensing should be 20 to 25%, because it's medium risk, medium cost, and you know fairly quickly if you get a deal or not. So this is maybe 3 to 5 years, but the deep tech is even longer. Licensing, roughly a year. But this is instant. So this is the cash cow of the university. And also from a tech transfer point of view, Tony Raven, who's head of tech transfer at Cambridge University, he points out that he does 5 spin-offs a year, 20 to 25 licensing deals, 350 consultancies. And that's how he builds a network inside the faculty of the university. Because 5 spin-offs a year, he doesn't become famous. But 350 consultancy agreements, that's where he builds his internal sales channels. And that's where he gets the future spin-offs. So that is definitely very worthwhile considering. Have a balanced portfolio approach to your tech transfer activities. Touch upon this, of course, but it's also a wider target group in the sense that we include humanities and social sciences, for instance, and all the other faculties. When Uppsala University in Sweden made a Gallup about who's doing the most consultancy, they had a bit of a surprise because it was the Department of Theology. Right? Catholic Church selling, yes, and then that's a good business model. But it's kind of interesting. Impact in society is something that, of course, matters more and more. And it should be a core business of the university. This is actually by law in Sweden. We at ASDP, using the National Association memberships, we try to look into what does it look like in the rest of Europe. Because in Sweden, they have 3 missions, and all of them are core missions. But if I delete all the home pages at Gothenburg University that mentions the word research, then probably 50% of the home pages are gone. If I delete utilization, innovation, etc., nobody would ever notice. So of course, they're not equal in that sense. And that's one of the issues, one of the challenges. So for me, research is important because we create knowledge, and we need knowledge, but we use a lot of money. education is actually transferring new knowledge to individuals, but utilization is transferring this in an organized way into society, to businesses, etc. Hence, we can't cheat. It's also becoming more and more challenge-driven. That's definitely, I would say, taken for granted in Sweden at the moment. I'm merely mentioning this as a byline because I'm not sure what the structure is here in Europe. But I think this is something that we need to take into account. Research proposals in Sweden can never be submitted without mentioning which challenge they are actually targeting, which I think is an interesting trend. And of course, this gives impact also on the tech transfer. So, something we're working on is defining the profession. Think about healthcare professionals. We have physicians, we have nurses, etc., working at hospitals. And physicians are surgeons, there are internal medicines, etc. And surgeons are divided into thorax surgeons, brain surgeons, whatever. How does that look on PRO professionals? Well, the way I look upon it is that we have researchers, we have teachers, and we should have utilizers at the universities. And of course, those utilizers work in a lot of things, tech transfer being one of them. And then I mean the original definition of tech transfer, the commercial part. What are the implications of this? Well, we need to restructure the entire university. Because if this is a core mission, then of course 1/3 of the business on a national average should be utilization. And that doesn't mean you can have a tech transfer office that runs 200 million euros worth of money for a university. That organizational structure doesn't work anymore. So in the production facility of the university, i.e. the faculty, I'm a bit sloppy here with words, but you understand the meaning, we should have researchers, teachers, and utilizers. And of course, if you train in biology, you become a biologist. And then you become a researcher in biology. But you're already a biologist. So hence, we need some sort of training to become a utilizer in biology. And of course, you can do your pedagogical merits as well to become a teacher at university. So this is, for me, a future model where actually we do utilization in the faculties. But of course, that has to be cross-sectional as well. And then we have the utilization administration that is essentially the tech transfer office of today. So the entire university is structured in a wrong way. And this, of course, is why there are no homepages at Gothenburg University, because they haven't even got a clue what this is. So it's about education. We need to train them, we need to tell them, and we need to do the political job. And that is at the European Commission level and at all national agencies level, is to start asking for utilization when we do research funding. Thank you.
Thank you. I want just to say that this is something which comes out from how many companies, how many RTOs? Is an analysis of 400 RTOs. So it's a very interesting input, and I think we can bring you really what is the current trend in changing in the European, but not only the European, also you have links also with Australia, with America, and with Asia. So that's where this the great advantage of having this organization. Any question on what has been presented by Henrik? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Nina Brankovic. I'm actually coming from Croatia. I'm a researcher. Yeah, well, I am. I really enjoy all presentations. I really think they're really, really interesting. Because I'm... Yeah, I know, definitely, that's the last one. I have a question, actually. I had a lot of questions, but I'll try to be concise. First one is, I like the initiative, I like everything you said. But my question is, because it's kind of approach of developing entrepreneurial universities. Universities that will connect better to applied research and to industry. What is the connection between these and the HI Innovate, the European Union initiative on developing entrepreneurial universities, where you have 5 different, probably I don't have to explain. That's my question. Another question, which was really, really, really interesting from the previous presenter, and thank you so much, because I really like what you did in Berlin. And I really like the idea that you mentioned that everything started in canteen, kind of connecting. It's fantastic. But since I'm doing evaluations on Horizon projects, Horizon applications, and there is a huge initiative or the huge program, Science Outside of Classroom, which is perfectly fit in what you said. I have never ever read anything so great like you mentioned, anything so simple like you mentioned, canteen where everybody are actually connecting. So, why not using the best practice that already function in the other parts of the EU? That's my main question.
Maybe you start. Do you know this initiative?
I don't know all the details, obviously, but I know of them. And the way I see it, we're in a learning phase, and we need to experiment. And I think this is a great initiative in order to test certain things, but we're taking it from the practitioner's perspective. This is another type of perspective, and both are necessary in order to drive with the necessary change.
Okay. Do you want to add anything?
Sure.
To what?
Well, everybody loves this canteen example, and it actually has a lot to it. However, the real kind of relational substance only grows when you have done joint projects. And that is why I think having the canteen plus talking about some kind of what do they talk about? Or do they know each other? Does the professor or the postdoc who's just fiddling with something his opponent on the other side of the table while having the pizza would need? That substance only was really generated with topical networks. I think the canteen everybody likes and it's nice, but you wouldn't believe how people who actually would have things to talk, especially if they are real science, meaning nerds, how long they can sit on the same table without even talking to each other. So, adding this substance is a must as well. Yeah.
Right. Also an anecdote. Now the new science park, besides having also kindergarten, they also have dog gardens. So you can bring the dog, because a lot of people have the dog. So
there was this question about best practice. It is actually the association where we kind of, like Ljubljana was mentioned, yes, this is exactly, they really work exactly, we all know them. So there is some exchange, but very often people change management so often because the governance is not okay, yeah?
Okay, Branka, thanks a lot. Now, I think if there is no other pressing question, I would like to ask our last speakers to tell us something about a wonderful project that is happening not far from here. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, but it is quite complicated to have my presentation after your 3 presentations, amazing, interesting one, very much focused on tech transfer, because my presentation is not about tech transfer. My presentation is about, but in a way, I have the chance for being organizer of the co-organizer of the event, so also I took the chance to give you a hint of what is happening in Romania. So my presentation is about an attempt to orchestrate the development of the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem around something at the frontier of science and technology. So let's see. And I have 3 points: setting the scene, walking the talk, and concluding remarks. What's about? Romania is hosting a nice, beautiful, amazing, unique research infrastructure in the world. It's about high performance, it's about high powerful lasers and nuclear physics. It is actually what we are hosting in Romania is part of the distributed research infrastructure in Europe, but each of the pillars has its own identity. But the Romanian pillar, it's extreme light, nuclear lasers, how powerful lasers, and nuclear physics. It is really a revolution of laser science. I put Gerard here, Gerard Moreau. He's a Nobel winner last year for the let's say the method generating the what we have now in high powerful lasers. But I like very much what he said at the beginning of 2008 when we start doing things here. If we manage to have it functional, definitely the message will be go East young man. And it was around the idea of brain circulation, not brain gain, brain drain, and so on. So go East young man, it was the nice, beautiful message. I put some color in my presentation, high powerful laser and unique gamma beam system, and it is close to operational. Just 2 months ago, it reached the highest power in the world from the point of view of lasers, 10 petawatts. It's at the frontier of the frontier of the frontier. And it is not only the frontier of science, it's the frontier of technology. And because we are talking about smart specialization and place-based and the place role, it is next door, 7 kilometers from the city center of Bucharest. It's an area, gifted area of nuclear physics, research in nuclear physics, but also technologies in nuclear physics, because we develop CANDU pieces for the CANDU technology in that area. Around 3,000 persons working in research, 1,000 researchers, 2,000 research staff close to Bucharest, and Bucharest is the hub of the most important universities in Romania, including the Polytechnica. We are here. So place-based, everything is there, and also nice, beautiful. A colleague of mine from Magurele, yes. Hello. Very nice, beautiful application foreseen by whom and by what? It was developed a white book of possible applications, scientific cases proving different kind of application. Is not my job now to, I put the slide here, you have, but also a huge impact on medical applications, changing actually the technology in the way we treat cancer. The traditional technology is here. Oh, no, sorry. Digital area, it's not working. Laser-driven proton therapy will change definitely the technology here. Also, radiopharmaceuticals, it's a totally new area because of the way isotopes are going to be produced. Many other applications, and there are at least 10 amazing, nice, beautiful applications at the frontier. I stop here. It's enough. Frontier of science and technology, let's walk the talk. And because we have it, and before going and walking, it is something I do consider you have to know. For the first time in the history of structural funds, first time, cohesion funds, European Commission decided to invest in pan-European research infrastructure. It is for the first time. The business model is totally different because for such large research infrastructure, the normal business model was countries stay together. They decided, okay, we are going to take a share from the investment. We are going to, and we have a commitment on a long-term involvement in the setting, paying, putting a percentage. It's the same with CERN, with spallation source, with all the rest of the pan-European or international research infrastructure. It is not the case here. It is not the case. Actually, the building and the whole infrastructure was paid with structural funds. There is no any agreement between countries to pay for the running cost and for the next development. So it's a full-fledged, complex challenge to do something. But I not touch it because it's too complex now. But from our point of view, we try to see if we have the diamond. It is something at the uniqueness. Okay, attracting everybody because it is unique from the science and technology point of view. Attracting scientists, attracting technology, attracting companies, attracting what to do. And we start talking about a kind of vision for developing the area for a smart territorial development intervention. I told you from the beginning, it is an attempt to orchestrate the development of the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. It was in 2015. And we put together stakeholders, we discussed with big business, small business, with local administration, many players, and we reach a nice, beautiful idea of, let's call it Laser Valley. But not only, lasers are a lot. Laser Valley, land of lights. Why lights? Not because somebody will switch the... No, because both laser and gamma, both are lights, different kind of lights. But so, it's... Okay, in 2015. And actually our idea was let's do something red for sea, let's vision something nice to live, nice to work, nice place to educate, well connected, everything around with a nice beautiful ecosystem, community development, doing business, many things around, and we came with nice beautiful idea, and I put some. Later on in 2016, at the beginning, we asked ourselves, what is actually the idea of the young generation? Because we are old enough. Let's put young people to talk about. And we organized nice, beautiful international competition for ideas of development, for the kind of smart territory, smart development for the core area located where the infrastructure is located, 30 proposals. And I put here some nice, beautiful idea how the area could like, but we asked them also to talk about real recommendations for putting the projects in place. It was not enough. We also wanted to see an update socioeconomic impact assessment, because in 2010, at the beginning of of ELI, it was done something for the European Commission for being funded, blah, blah. So we invited business to say something, and Pricewaterhouse did a nice, beautiful, amazing socioeconomic impact assessment saying, hey guys, it is an amazing, interesting, we expect up to 2 billion euros investment in the area, turnaround of 100 million euros each year, but we have to do this, 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 and this. Nice, beautiful, because all the recommendation came from for a Big Four, so well prepared and well. Also, we try to see some other recommendation, and we talk with World Bank. Hey guys, we want to see some knowledge and economic spillovers. Give us some recommendation for this, and they did on their own. It is not usual because World Bank asked for money. This time they did it for free. And they prepare a report, Romania Laser Valley development scenarios, and they put here 3 scenarios with a lot of recommendations, almost to be ready to be taken on board, but not enough to walk the talk. Magnet City, yes, of course, close to Bucharest, the huge concentration. We start talking about development ideas, smart city, and a week ago it was inspiring action actually was our idea. And by the way, last week in Magurele was a nice, beautiful event on smart city development. Also, it was a nice, beautiful case study for Science Park. And now the Science Park is under the contract with EBRD. For it is already financed, so inspiring action, not only vision, but also inspiring action, not doing, but inspiring, preparing, orchestrating the development. And what if some projects we put since the beginning on the idea, smart city, urban regeneration, already we have something in. I don't know if you know, I didn't say anything about this. In Magurele, for ELI, we have the most powerful setting in geothermal energy in Europe, 5 megawatts. I know because I asked my colleagues, I was the Minister of Research in 2010 when the project was prepared, I asked, I want to see something green. And they decided there are 1,000 holes, 100 meters, 100 plus heat pumps and 5 megawatts. And because we have this, we try to be partners, and we are partners in Positive Energy District project now mounted at the European level. And the last Urban Europe booklet present Magurele as one of the 100 places to be part of Plus Energy District. Is a development concept. Plus Energy is a development concept affecting a lot of interventions. Next one. Science Park, it is already up and running as a developing mechanism, but also we have some other ideas, and they are on different stages, cognitive computer centers, because you know, data we expect to have from the experiments are huge. Romania is also part of the CERN, and we have the Tier 2 here in Romania. We need actually a different way of understanding experimental data but also nuclear medicine hub. I told you about applications, uniqueness of applications, and also science village, a way of giving access to young students to come close to something unique from the point of view of science, science communication, outreach, helping us to see how we may engage more young people in science. And actually, why not the idea, the final idea was, let's see if somehow, some way, with the Positive Energy District concept, we may use the smart urban experiment, we may develop as a smart urban experimentation place. With green technology, smart city, intelligent infrastructure, energy, digital infrastructure, sensors, and so on. Why not, if we are at the frontier of science and technology, why not to do amazing, crazy things, not out of, with no any fits on the ground, but actually pushing the boundary of what could be done. And concluding remarks, it's about connecting dots. And it is not reinventing the wheel. And I put here some of the initiative, and I close my presentation soon. We asked the European Commission for an assistance from Structural Reform Support Service. Why? For the funding mix. Great. We are in discussions with the European Commission for a policy support facilitation for knowledge and economic spillovers. How to? We are already using structural funds in a project in which we are working with World Bank and the European Investment Bank for setting up the delivery unit for the development. We have a vision, but also to see strategy and plan real working. Doing conferences around doing business in Magurele, because science we are doing. And looking at the different kind of, spillover, knowledge and economic spillovers. Actually, it's about connecting the dots. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You're on your way to do what also Hardy has done for Berlin. Understand? Any question? Yes, please. Present yourself and a short question.
Thank you very much. Ioan Ursu is my name, and I just want to make a comment, in fact, not a question. So our lecturer today said that I'm one of his friends, which is a little bit exaggerated. So in fact, I'm first of all a kind of silent admirer of him, and I will tell you why. Because he is the rare person that, first of all, is talking about what he has done and not what others have done. And in this case of Eli, he was definitely important from the beginning of the project until now. So the idea of the laser Valley Land of Lights is his. It's not an idea, but he did, as you see, much more. And I wanted to highlight this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have a question. Maybe because I was with Hardy and last week to this presentation, we came out with basically 3 recommendations. First of all, governance has to be very clear. Secondly, if you want to do a laser valley, put in the hands of the private, if possible. Definitely. So with the PPP, and third also, it's a question of try to also improve the visibility by connecting with the Bucharest area, because that will also, I think we were talking before about the real estate. I think there's now, for instance, Milano, it has been there is the site which is in Rho, which is about 10 kilometers from Milano. It's called the Milano Industrial District, and has attracted a company which is Lend-Lease that decided to invest 2 billion euro in the project, and this is also with the concession from the owners, which are public owners, and they have to respect the master plan. So I think these are suggestions, but also maybe questions if you want to react.
May I comment a bit? You know, it is something I didn't go into details, but it's important for us. The infrastructure is located close to Bucharest, no way to have access to structural funds, to cohesion funds. So our job now is to prepare. It's very complicated, you know, limited, very complicated. But again, the way infrastructure was funded is an exceptional way. So we are preparing ourselves to negotiate with the European Commission in an exceptional way. And we are preparing a kind of smart territorial intervention, not integrated territorial intervention, just to, let's say, be able to have some public funds for decreasing the risk of the business.
Very good.
The idea is not to have them, it's just for decreasing the risk of the business. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So I think I have to close here because everybody is a bit tired and also hot. Go down and reconvene here, if possible, at 5 o'clock. Is it okay? Yes, the second session will be here, yes. The one on technology transfer, the one on funding next. Proof of concept session. Proof of concept.
I'm actually going to work with
have
It's very important science, and when it comes from technology management, the first thing you learn that it is about rational culture. Very good presentation. Thanks a lot. That was fantastic.
Nice to meet you.
So,
we are from Japan.
Oh,
We are very interested in the activity of chairs. Specialization. We are from
outsiders.
government organization. Japan Science and
Okay. Can I contact you?
Our center is like an internal think tank for JS. We are doing policy.
Ah, then I should put my in case.
They will start the air conditioning. Well, I'll just take my
And I'm afraid. Once we have everybody on board. You made a reference to good one. But we have a couple extras, so even if this one doesn't work. Ah. Okay, when...
Hello, yeah.
Good. Okay. But we have one on at a time, otherwise we have microphone here, as we say. Yeah, I hope, I truly hope that more people will join us any moment, but for those of you who are here, thank you very much for the patience, because it's been quite a long day. But we'll try to keep it short and sweet, because there is a reception coming after that, and we don't want to be the ones who hold you. Just to introduce myself, my name is Elena Antonova, and I'm a member of the Competence Center on Technology Transfer that probably you heard about in the previous talk. And I have, let's say, responsibility to look after what we call financial instruments for technology transfer. And the topic of this last session is on proof of concept. As you know, turning inventions into products, turning ideas or inventions into products is what we call technology transfer. But this is a process that starts with a very critical and important element, which is what we call the proof of concept. Proof of concept is this phase of the process where one needs to, let's say, prove that the invention has a market potential, that it's viable, that it can work, become a product, etc., etc. Now, the problem with this phase is that it's usually consuming finance, it's consuming resources, whether it is because you want to build a prototype and it might be expensive, whether it is because you need to make a product design and you have to in-source a specific expertise. Maybe you need to file for a patent application. Those are expensive. These are all activities that fall within the umbrella of proof of concept activities, so to say. And making financing for those activities available has been challenging. However, I prepared a fantastic lineup for you this afternoon with practitioners, funders, people who have experience with early stage financing, and they can probably share with us some of the best practices in creating, conceptualizing, or implementing proof of concept or early stage financing instruments, or they can also tell us about the challenges that we have in the sector, the availability or the lack of availability of proof of concept and early stage finance. And also I would like everybody to think a little bit about what are the best models, maybe that can be also applicable to our region, as we are focusing on Southeast Europe at this conference. So without further delay, because apparently we have to catch up for the previous delay and be extra organized this afternoon, I will very quickly present the members of the panel and then give them an opportunity to make a very short, kind of 5-6 minutes intervention, if possible. And then I would really like to make this interactive, if possible, so just raise your hand whenever you have a question. I think this will work with everybody, or we keep the questions for the end. So we have, starting from here on my left, Mihai Sfintescu, who is Managing Director of Abilito Capital, and a jury member of the European Innovation Council. Then we have Mladen Stojanovic, who is a coordinator in technology transfer for the Innovation Fund in Serbia. We have another lady on the panel, Petra Karanikic. She's heading the TTO office, and she's also an assistant professor at the Department of Biotechnology at the University of Rijeka. Then we have Alex Payne here next to me, Associate Director for Small Businesses at the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. And we have Frane Sesnic, who is a director at Zagreb Innovation Center, if I pronounce this correctly, Zicer. Zicer, sorry. Zicer. Okay, so we'll start with Mihai. And I would like actually to ask him to share a little bit his experience from job that he had, the responsibility that he had with an early stage venture capital firm here in Romania, and perhaps think about how can we de-risk technology transfer investment. Thank you.
It's working, yeah. Yeah, so I a couple of years ago, from like 2012 to 2016, I led a venture capital fund here in Romania, which was or is called 3TS Catalyst Romania. We made 10 investments. I think I would say all of them were in the software or internet technologies. So for sure, all in the ITC sector, and we looked at both Series A investments, but also some of the seed investments. It would be fair to say that from the perspective of a VC fund, it's always preferable to be a bit later in the stage of the company. So not at the proof of concept, but preferably after the company has revenues, because then you also have the commercial validation, right? Because sometimes proof of concept you have the technical validation and some interest, but it's only after you have revenues that you sort of know that you can really have a business. Currently, I think I would say the market environment is a bit better because we have now 2 seed funds which are bundled with accelerators, and and because of that they are very much into proof of concept investing, because typically an accelerator does proof of concept investments. So that's certainly an improvement. But on the other hand, what I can see, it's also predominantly ICT investments, because these are easier to scale and to develop at the early stage. In terms of doing to invest at the proof of concept and then to facilitate the technology transfer, obviously this is kind of highly risky, and therefore my perspective is that there should be some public funding support to de-risk these types of investments, because otherwise I think for many private investors it might be too much risk to take on themselves. So that's that. Maybe should I also explain a bit with EIC, the difference perhaps? Yeah. So currently I'm a jury member with the European Innovation Council, and in contrast with what happens here, there we have companies from all the verticals, all the economic verticals. So you have like medtech, you have biotech. So it's not purely ICT as we can see in Romania and other countries in the region. And we also see a lot of spin-offs and spin-outs from universities. My guess is that because the technology transfer activities are well organized in some of the more developed European countries, they are also capable to generate significant numbers of opportunities in all the verticals, not just ICT. Because just in, let's say, in biotech, sometimes you work for 10 years to develop a new medicine before you can make €1 in revenues. So, so I think from that perspective, there is a clear need to develop and improve the existing technology transfer capabilities in Romania and other countries in the region.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting point. Yes, there are indeed accelerators and venture capital funds in the region that do invest predominantly in IT and ITC. Maybe something that the panel can, or we have a discussion later and we can think about here is how we can actually encourage more support being made available also in the other sectors beyond IT and ICT. Without further delay, now I'll move to Mladen. And the Innovation Fund in Serbia is probably one of the pioneers in the region in terms of providing support and also financial support for early stage investment and early stage SME startup development. We'll be very interested to hear what activities you've had so far. How do you see the future coming? I know that you're thinking to also have a more dedicated instrument on proof of concept. And generally, what challenges do you face in the region? Is it a model that works and you would recommend also to other countries in the region?
Thank you, Elena. As a matter of fact, we have in the final stage of designing a proof of concept program at this moment. But before I jump to the details about that, I would like to expand a bit on what you said, what you were talking about proof of concept, and try to just define it a little bit better. So if we see technology transfer as a process of transforming an idea into a product that is successfully placed on the market, a proof of concept is actually a critical step in this process. It is a sort of turning point at which the fundamental research efforts are getting reduced, and what is tomorrow going to be a product starts to emerge. So then, what is the proof of concept? It is actually a sort of exercise that tests a design idea or an assumption. And its aim is to provide evidences that this assumption can actually work as part of the future product. So that's the goal of the proof of concept, to show that it's something can work. Then successful proof of concept can give rise to a prototype in the further, let's say, development process, which actually shows the innovator, it visualizes how the product can look like. So it shows how it could work. It shows the product with its key features. So whereas proof of concept doesn't really tell you about how the product will look and what the user experience of it will be, the prototype offers the first physical manifestation of the. I mean, normally it is like that in certain area. Doesn't have to be like that. I mean, take IT for instance. I mean, proof of concept prototyping could be an integral exercise. But why am I saying that? I just want to point out that development of proof of concept in our product is a difficult exercise, And these are the assumptions that we had in mind when we were designing this program. So currently, or since 2016, we are piloting technology transfer program at Innovation Fund. So the goal of the program is to actually identify inventions from R&D institutions and to make technology transfer deals with those inventions. So to provide certain amount of money and technical assistance to find partners and to close deals. And we did do a couple of deals. We did 3 licensing deals out of 30 projects that we had, and we have now 3 or 4 startups formed. But we learned some things from this experiment. So one of the things was that the applications that we were receiving in the whole process were in a very early stage of the development. So there were no real inventions apart of couple of exemptions. And everything that was coming to us, it was early in the development phase. Even those who claimed to have proof of concept offered very little compelling evidences about that. And then we said, okay, you can apply for a grant and you can do proof of concept if you want. But then within the 6 months to 1 year, that's the length of the projects that we have. It's not really realistic to expect that someone does proof of concept, make a prototype, raise the interest in a company and get a license. So it was quite challenging. And our experience was that once the money dries out, the team loses the focus, switches to something else, and then basically the whole process stops over there. So that's why we wanted to create a proof of concept which will be actually a step before the technology transfer process, so that someone who is doing a proof of concept can actually show that the process works, that he or she made something, and then in the next step they can get follow-on funding for further development, for patenting and so on. The second thing that we saw was that we had very messy situation about IP ownership. So although it is regulated by laws and bylaws, the situation is very shady actually, and people know very little about it. Legal staff at faculties and research institute don't deal with IP ownership. Simply, they don't do that in their daily work. So you need a special skill to deal with that. And in the technology transfer program, we said, okay, we'll receive only applications who have ownership consolidated, which made a big burden on the teams who were applying. So basically, they had, before they came to us, they had to engage privately a lawyer to deal with the ownership, and then to come to us. And basically, this process can last for a couple of months. We had one situation where the ownership was held between 3 universities from 3 different countries and shared together with a private company. So you can imagine how much time it takes for a lawyer to deal with this issue. So that's why we said, okay, we'll do proof of concept. You don't have to have consolidated ownership, but do it midway through the project. So you'll get funding for a year. After 6 months, we want you to document that you have locked ownership. Because if we want to sell or license something in the next step, we really need to know who is the legal title. And the third thing was the scope of protection. So it was mainly related to patent protection. We allowed money for patenting in the technology transfer program, but in most of the cases, prior art was not searched properly. Freedom to operate was not done. The scope of an invention was quite vague, and it took a lot of time for a patent attorney to prepare a decent patent application. So that's why we said, okay, we'll give you a proof of concept money. You don't have to file a patent application with it, but do all the groundwork in this phase. So search the prior art, define the scope of your application, see whether you have patentable invention, and then we'll do the filing in the next step. So basically, these were the main three things, main three learning points that we had in the past 3 years while implementing the technology transfer program. And in addition to that, we included in the proof of concept program mandatory mentorship. So we are creating a pool of mentors who will help the research teams to sort of delineate from R&D efforts towards a marketing, towards a product, to define an MVP, to see what's the market segment that the product fits well in, and to prepare actually a commercialization strategy for the next phase. So we are launching the program in September this year, and I hope that within a year and a half I can come here and share the results of our exercise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mladen, for sharing some of the lessons learned. I think you made a very interesting point, how important it is to have education and understanding of the technology transfer process, and clearly set technology transfer procedures, so to say. And this is at the level of researchers, but also TTOs, early stage companies, etc. I think that Hendrik's got a comment to make. If you don't mind, we'll take this opportunity.
Thank you. Very interesting. Actually, this is a question. Lessons from Sweden is essentially, if you give researchers money, they just carry on doing technology. Did you ever consider giving the TTO the funding and work with the project of the researcher? Even if you create a startup and the professor owns the startup, they will just continue to use proof of concept funding for doing R&D.
Actually, in the technology transfer program, let's say half of the grants that we gave it to the university, because in Serbia TTOs are an integral part of the university. They are not separate legal entities. So indeed, tech transfer offices had an opportunity to deal with the funding and with the ownership issues, stuff like that. But the thing is that actually we have one, let's say, fully functional TTO in Serbia, in Belgrade, and other universities have offices on the paper that are not well developed to manage those grants, and that's probably the weakest point if we look at the ecosystem. So the lack of tech transfer expertise in the interior of the country. So that's something to work on as well.
I believe that also Frane has a question for you.
Yeah, I would like to ask Mladen, because I agree with him that mentor pool is very important, takes a very important role in the ecosystem, and I would like to ask him, how do you motivate them, how do you select them, and who pays for them?
Well, at this stage, we'll create a pool of mentors. The Innovation Fund will select them. and they will be paid from the proceeds of the grant. So actually each team who receives the grants is obliged to, they must contract a mentor, and there's a minimum of days and things that the mentor should do. And I mean, they can also hire him for a longer period. They can continue to use him in the technology transfer program, which is the step afterwards. And the decision on who the mentor for each team will be depends on the evaluation report, because the evaluation report points out the weak points in the proposals. So this is how we plan to engage a mentor.
And are the mentors more into business oriented, or they are in technology oriented?
Exclusively business oriented.
Interesting. Thank you very much for this intervention. And we'll proceed with Petra. Petra is a very seasoned professional in technology transfer with a lot of track record in the Croatian ecosystem. Can you please tell us from the perspective of a TT manager how important it is to have proof of concept support or financing at hand? And in your view, what impact does an available pot of money or expertise can make over the technology transfer or IP commercialization process?
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm glad that you asked this question, and I'm glad that I have opportunity to speak after you, because we mentioned a lot that education is very important for practicing technology transfer. So I will just start with one thing. I remember when I started to do first steps in tech transfer, which was in 2006 when I enrolled in my PhD study to have a PhD in tech transfer. And I remember I wrote a first paper which was supporting a spin-off company at University of Rijeka. That was in 2006. And the reaction were, okay, what is a spin-off company? So today, after, let's say, 15 years, and from the perspective of, let's say, tracking the Croatian ecosystem and following all the financial instruments and tech transfer activities, I can really notice 2 or 3 important things. So first of all, this awareness raising and capacity building, which is of course the main prerequisite for all tech transfer activities, I can say that Croatia done, let's say, quite a good job. What is lacking is, let's say, a dedicated budget, continuous budget, which could leave people to work their job and not to go from TTOs when the funding is over, that they need to go to different places to find a job. So this was the first problem that we occurred in the tech transfer activities. The second that I noticed is the importance of proof of concept. So why do I say that? Even though Technology Transfer Office of University of Rijeka is not recognized center for proof of concept, it's our science and tech park, but our system is like this, that we closely collaborate. So till now in Croatia there were 7, let's say, generations of proof of concept, and I saw the data that in these 7 generations there were 54 final beneficiaries of this on the Croatian level, and it was worth it a little bit more than 2 million euros. At this moment, it's open 8th call for proof of concept, which will be closed at the end of September this year, so we will see what will happen. But what I am worried a bit is that for the last 2 calls for proof of concept, there was no proof of concept for public. We have this separated, POTS, POC public and private, which means that for the last 2 calls, universities were not eligible to apply. At this moment, our ministry, our state secretary is here. Of course, they are solving this issue. They are also gathering us at the beginning of July. We have several. They want to hear what practitioners have to say, which I'm very happy. And on the other hand, why I think it's this proof of concept from the practical point of view is very important, because it showed us that University of Rijeka had 7 projects out of these 54 till now, and they were worth like 250,000 euros. Most of them were from POTS Public, and most of these projects came from the area of medicine, biomedicine, and engineering. And how we used this proof of concept in a very good way. So it was established also one program which was a support program for technology transfer offices. And through this program we were able to finance projects that were already done the proof of concept. So after this, let's say, both technical and commercial validation that was already mentioned today, so we were able to finance pre-commercial and commercial activities. So it ended up that 2 projects that came from the Faculty of Medicine that were done completely through the proof of concept phase, it ended up with a full commercialization through this project, because then we managed to finance IP protection, we dealt with the IP ownership, we found companies that were able to produce these kind of products, we found the distributors. So it ended up that we signed several license agreements, so now we are finally expecting some incomes from commercialization. And I must say that if there was no this proof of concept program, I don't think we would be able first to do the awareness raising and to sensibilize researchers from our university, because it happened that this was also one of the ways how they could finance their research, focused research. There was money for certain research, but this was really focused, and then they were able to see that they can actually do something with their research. And at the end of the day, we managed to educate a lot of researchers on these important topics that were mentioned, and to actually get good examples, which we will now use as good best practices, so that we can also motivate other researchers. So in any case, I think that the basis is this proof of concept, but only proof of concept will not resolve this issue. We need also to think through other financial instruments that will come as a continuation to this proof of concept, and then we will probably have projects for you to finance and to commercialize further, spin-off or something like that. Okay? So at this moment I will stop with this, but of course I will be open for questions.
Perfect, thank you, Petra. If I'm to have a main takeaway from